Whether it's the combination of Sean Payton and Tom Brady, a brand new rookie quarterback, or even a rare coach trade in the NFL, the New Orleans Saints 2023 season opportunities are absolutely wild. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, being Locked On Saints, your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays in Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday, and then some on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your own football franchise? This game, if so, is definitely for you. To download the mobile game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. Our listeners are going to get a 100% free boost with their franchise when you use the promo code Locked On, all caps, in the game store. Tell you more about Ultimate Football GM later. On today's episode, we're going to be breaking down the Carl Granderson game-winning play up against Deshaun Watson, dropping back into coverage, getting the sack, the anatomy of that play, how it happens, and how you finish it. Then we'll take a look at Alvin Kamara's usage, because there are some things that you're going to be really excited about in terms of how the New Orleans Saints used Alvin Kamara in this Week 16 game. Unfortunately, this is December, but things trending in the right direction there. But first, I just want to take a moment to appreciate the 2023 possibilities that lie ahead for the New Orleans Saints, because after so many seasons of consistent cohesion, continuity, all of these things, right? Sean Payton, Drew Brees, 2006, all the way through 2020, and then you had Sean Payton in 2021. Now things started to make a big shift here in 2022 once Sean Payton kind of surprisingly left over the course of the offseason, or took time away. Remember, he didn't retire. Now, all of a sudden, this offseason, you could see some of the wildest things happen for this team. And with so many years of consistency, so many years of continuity, so many years of knowing exactly what's next, the excitement of the 2023 offseason and not having any idea what could be next is something that you should be excited about. This is part of professional sports, especially today's professional sports. We're in a situation now where we're seeing players change teams all the time, coaches all over the place, all these other things. Consistent coaching changes everything. This is what the NFL is now. And the New Orleans Saints are not about to be left out of it. And even when the New Orleans Saints, quote, shouldn't be making news anymore, quote, shouldn't be relevant anymore because they lost their head coach and lost their future Hall of Fame, lost their Hall of Fame quarterback and their future Hall of Fame head coach, those guys have found a way consistently to still be relevant. Some of it comes down to winning games, right? The other part of it comes down to what's next for this team is so intriguing. Think about the possibilities of what could happen and consider how rare they are. The head coach that stepped away could potentially return and bring with him the greatest quarterback to ever play NFL football. Is he still that quarterback? Absolutely not. Not one bit, not one way. But is he still a really good quarterback? Absolutely. So this guy that was in New Orleans, that won a Super Bowl with the team, but then had some down years, 2014, 15, and 16, rebuilt the franchise along with guys like Jeff Ireland and, of course, Mickey Loomis, Kai Hartley, all these other folks, and, of course, Terry Fontenot, who's now with the Atlanta Falcons, rebuilt the franchise with them in 2017, and then ended up stepping away after the 2021 season, only to then potentially return in 2023 with Tom Brady. Okay, that's one possibility, right? Albeit far-fetched, albeit unlikely, it's still a possibility. We never say never on this show. The second possibility is that even if the Saints do maintain Dennis Allen, which seems to be the most likely option, especially at this point, he's won 2 games in a row with them. They won a game that no one expected them to win in Cleveland, all these other things. There are reports coming out, Jeff Duncan, over at NOLA.com mentioning that the Saints are completely committed right now to Dennis Allen. I'm sure there's caveats to that and all that, but it seems like the most likely situation there. So even if they do that, they could still potentially do something that rarely happens in the NFL, which is that head coach trade. Yeah, we've seen it a few times, and we saw it recently with Bruce Arians, but before that, we really didn't see it since John Gruden, and before that, whenever, right? So this is still history making, in terms of being an offseason, as it gets in that way. And then that's possibility 2. Possibility 3 is that doesn't even happen, but the New Orleans Saints could still be in the search for a new quarterback over the course of the offseason, could potentially draft their future quarterback or a guy that they hope to be their future quarterback, which in and of itself is an interesting thing to follow. If they draft a guy like Hendon Hooker, let's say in the 2nd round, or they go for another one of these other guys that are going to be in the 3rd, 4th round, or even the 2nd, if they raise it with a guy like Jaron Hall could potentially raise his draft stock into the 2nd round. So even if they don't get the 1st round picks, or if they don't trade the former head coach, they could still end up being a very interesting team in 2023 to watch in a developing story because they've invested in a rookie quarterback that they believe could be the future of their franchise. So those are just 3 of the possibilities, and those are ones that we'll be watching out for all over the course of the rest of the season into the offseason. But there's so many other possibilities as well, including if the Saints don't trade Sean Payton in 2023 and he doesn't return in 2023, then you're back at the potential to trade him in the offseason of 2024. So that narrative, that opportunity, that story never goes away. So the New Orleans Saints went from being this team where you never had questions about to now having some of the most exciting questions of the offseason waiting to be answered. The NFL cannot keep the New Orleans Saints out of the spotlight. The New Orleans Saints will always find their way there, whether it's because they're hoisting a Lombardi trophy, whether it's because they have one of the best coach-quarterback duos in the history of the league, or whether it's because there's simply so many different... by the way, they could potentially have one of the next best quarterback head coach duos in the NFL, or they're doing something that rarely happens in the NFL in trading away a head coach. No matter what, the New Orleans Saints are star power. They will find their way to center stage. They will find their way to down center. They will find their way under the spotlight, whether the NFL likes it or not. And in one case, if Sean Payton and Tom Brady end up teaming up in New Orleans, they put the NFL in a really, really tough position to choose whether or not they like the Saints or don't like the Saints, even with Tom Brady at the helm. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at Kamara's usage. Some things really shifted there. Some nice some progress in terms of the way that Alvin Kamara was utilized. Let's break it down to the number as we continue on with our analytics, and then we'll get into film as we break down Carl Granderson's game-winning play. And we'll get a little Alontae Taylor conversation in there as well, because I know you kind of already know it, but Alontae Taylor, still one of the best corners in the NFL. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. And today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. I absolutely love this game. We're talking about an exciting offseason for the New Orleans Saints. You could be having an exciting offseason like every 10 minutes thanks to this mobile game you can download on your phone by heading over to ultimate-gm.com. You can check out all the different games that they have there. You can also search for it in your app stores. This game puts you in control of your own football franchise as an NFL GM, allowing you to do things like hiring the right coaches, maybe finding the right quarterbacks. You get the number 1 draft pick to get things started off. You can get the offensive rookie of the year, defensive rookie of the year, all that. You could trade players, manage the salary cap, upgrade facilities, everything. So you want to go and check this out because it is super, super fun. If you're a football nerd like I am, if you like the salary cap, the front office stuff, this game is for you. And Locked On Saints listeners are going to get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On, all caps and all one word, in the game store. That's promo code Locked On in all caps, all one word, LOCKEDON. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in your app store. That's ultimate-gm.com or Ultimate Football GM in the app store. Start your dynasty today. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again, as always, making this your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're going to have a second episode up for you later on today as well, answering some of the biggest questions like, is the Sean Payton and Tom Brady thing even a reality? Like, truly, can it even happen? We'll break all that down and much more in today's later episode. But today, right now, what I want to get to is Alvin Kamara's usage and how it's starting to open up. One of the things that we discussed in a previous episode just from last week is that the New Orleans Saints have really been kind of confining Alvin Kamara's run game to between the tackles. And this has been at the detriment of his production. It started to happen back in 2021, by the way. This isn't a specific 2022 issue. Last year, it was the same thing. His yards per carry dropped at that point to 3.7 yards per carry on the season. That was after 2020, where it was 5 yards. 4.7 back in 2017, 2019, it was 6.1, 2018, 4.6. So you get the idea here that like the averages have been impacted when they started running him less to the outside, started running him more in between the tackles. Now, no matter what, because you don't really have a change of pace guy to go with Alvin Kamara the way that you had Mark Ingram in 2017, 2018, the way that you had Latavius Murray in 2019, 2020, he's not going to have another year to where he's got 5 yards per carry or 6 yards per carry because he still has to run those passes. Take those runs up the middle, right? He's the lead guy. He's going to get all that. So that's inherently going to drop his rushing averages and things like that. However, the percentage of time that they run him to the outside and get him out in space is still something that the Saints have control over. And we saw that up against the Cleveland Browns. So up until that Cleveland Browns game, before the Cleveland Browns game, the Saints were averaging using Alvin Kamara on the outside to the left just about 16% of the time, outside to the right just about 18% of the time, right in the middle of each of those. During Saturday's game and win against the Cleveland Browns, they ran him to the outside left just 10% of the time, 2 out of 20. But to the outside right, 25% of the time, 5 out of 20 times. So you saw the frequency with which they used Alvin Kamara in space, particularly in the run game, upped in that game. And look, that's a cold weather game. That's a game where you know you're going to have to run the ball a bunch. So because of that, you have to have some diversity and mix things around in the run game. It helps to have a guy like Taysom Hill who can also help you do that. Hello, Taysom Hill is your change of pace back now, kind of like Alvin Kamara was for Mark Ingram and Latavius Murray in previous years, right? So you kind of have to flip the expectation of Alvin Kamara based on that. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be getting Alvin Kamara out in space. We know what he can do in that situation. They also ran another one of those patented option routes with him, or choice routes, where he bends from outside of the backfield, and then based on the leverage of the defender that's guarding him, he either breaks to the outside if that defender has inside leverage, or breaks to the inside if that defender has outside leverage. He made the right choice, as he always does, to the inside and picked up 20 plus yards in the passing game that way. So we see how effective it is when the New Orleans Saints get Alvin Kamara involved in space. And Saturday's win against the Cleveland Browns was no exception. Another thing to keep in mind here, the outside percentage, right? So the percentage of time that the Saints have run Alvin Kamara outside, whether it's left or right, so far this season is hovering right around 27%. In that game against the Cleveland Browns, with 7 runs to the outside, 2 to the left, 5 to the outside right, they ran him 35% of the time to the outside. That is more akin or closer to what we have seen in the earlier portion of his career. The last time on a season-wide situation where he's run that much to either side would have been back in 2020. He also was out that much in 2018 and 2017. So to see that come back into the game plan for the New Orleans Saints is great. Unfortunately, it had taken until Christmas Eve for that to really start to come together. Or really not Christmas Eve, right? It's really been since week 8 that it started to come together against the Raiders. Then it kind of subsided for a little bit. Then they had to really refocus on it over the course of these last 2 games against Atlanta and against the Cleveland Browns. So trending in the right direction, but only 2 games left of the season. A dimming light when it comes to the end of the tunnel, when it comes to the postseason. We'll see what happens with all that. But again, we're not really worried about playoff odds or postseason odds here because that's highly, highly unlikely. So for the Saints, though, knowing that they're now figuring this part out is great, right? And maybe we'll get to see sort of the fruits of that by the end of this season. Maybe we won't in terms of watching this team for the rest of the year. But either way, it gives you an idea of what the Saints need to be able to do more consistently with one of the best playmakers in the NFL and Alvin Kamara looking ahead to that 2023 season, where who knows what's going to happen with the NFC South. If the NFC South is bad this year, it's probably going to be even worse next year. And that's a glowing opportunity for the New Orleans Saints if they can get the play calling right, if they can get more creative over on the offensive side, and if they make the appropriate decisions and the right decisions over the course of this offseason. And one of those decisions is going to be maximizing Alvin Kamara and how you can get it done. They're starting to put together the tape now so that they know exactly how to proceed toward their future. Another guy that's putting a lot of great stuff on tape is rookie cornerback Alontae Taylor. We're going to break down what he has done so far, what has made him one of the best corners in the NFL, as well as taking a look at Carl Granderson's game-winning play, the anatomy of that play. We'll went into it, how it happens, how he got it done. We're going to be talking about all of that and breaking it all down as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. And today's episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that I just know that you're going to love. That's why you're going to be able to find an all-new episode of The League as a bonus episode over on the Locked On NFL podcast. Yeah, we're bringing it to you like that to make sure you get it. The League, by the way, is narrated by Super Bowl champion and legendary smack talker Richard Sherman, and also sports broadcaster and rising star Taylor Rooks, both absolute stars in this field. You're going to be able to hear from them throughout this 8-part docuseries about some of the most bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely series connected all across of America's favorite sports, pro football. This particular bonus episode, The Way of the Cowboy, is all about the incredible story in which the 1977 Dallas Cowboys brought in Bruce Lee's protege to teach their defense martial arts, and thus ushering in a whole new approach to the way that the league trained. You'll be able to check all of that out, equal parts history, entertainment, and social commentary as well. So head over to Locked On NFL today for a bonus episode of The League, or you can catch the full series wherever you get your podcasts available. Now, just search The League, presented by Audible. Get in the game. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a quick breakdown of Carl Granderson's game-winning play, the sack that he got on Deshaun Watson on 4th down, which led to the turnover on downs and got the ball back into the Saints' hands over on the offensive side. Victory formation, bam, they were out of Cleveland with a dub. So how did this play come together? So the thing that everyone's talking about when it comes to this play is that Carl Granderson dropped back into coverage off of the defensive line and then came forward to close in on Deshaun Watson to make the play in the backfield. It was ruled a sack. It was a sack. And then that ended up causing the thing. But it's more than just that, right? Like, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Dennis Allen sort of spoke with us about it after the game, that the play was designed to be a 4-man rush. So that delay that Carl Granderson had was just a modification of a 4-man rush. It was a situation where, like, he could go back into coverage to help out if he needed to, but it was always going to end in him rushing the passer. Carl Granderson spoke about it a little bit more, gave a little bit more context that he dropped a bit further back into coverage because the Saints were kind of aware that they wanted to, that the Browns would want to take advantage of them over the seam with the tight end. So he listened to his linebacker, Demario Davis, who's back there calling all the shots. And he dropped back into coverage to help take that away specifically, and then closed in to get the sack on Deshaun Watson. So let's just discuss a little bit about all of the different mental things that have to go into this, because the anatomy of a play like this is so complex. And I'll be asking a bunch of different defensive players about it all throughout the week as we get into locker room later on today and all these other things, because I'm really, really intrigued about how they view this play. How hard is this play to make? What we know for sure is that a play like this is extremely hard to make. But it wasn't all Carl Granderson. Marcus Davenport did a great job here as well. And Carl Granderson even went so far as to shout out Davenport in his post-game presser because of what he did that contributed to Granderson being able to make the play. So as the snap happens, and I'm not really looking at this for film, we're just kind of talking through it and everything, so we just kind of like hit like, oh, okay, so this is a very unique play. So as the snap happens, there's 4 on the defensive line. Carl Granderson drops back into coverage. When he drops back into coverage, he's doing so again to try to take away and help out Demario Davis and the linebackers and take away that tight end seam. That was where they felt that Cleveland was going to want to go. Turns out that was right. There was a tight end just streaking right up that seam, and Carl Granderson was able to help to take that away. And honestly, even without Carl Granderson, the Saints had pretty good coverage in that area of the field no matter what. Corners on the outside, safeties over the top did a great job taking everything away, holding their coverage long enough in the end zone as the wide receivers started to scramble around a little bit. And then Carl Granderson's able to come down and fill a gap. The gap is the important part. So one of the things that the Saints have struggled with a lot when it comes to mobile quarterbacks is not just contain over on the outside, but opening up rushing lanes on the interior when trying to maintain contain. That A gap just gets wider and wider and wider as the defensive ends get further and further toward the outside. Or not the A gap, the B gap, which is the one in between the defensive end and the defensive tackle. And so oftentimes, right, it's really dictated by the offensive line. But you understand what I'm saying. Their pursuit toward the outside of opening up that contain ends up creating distance between where the tackle is and where the defensive end is. Marcus does a great job. Davenport does a great job on the outside, taking away contain. Deshaun Watson gets flushed out to his side. Watson can't bounce to the outside. But there's a lane. There's a rushing lane open in between Davenport and the nearest defensive tackle. That is the void that Carl Granderson steps in from about 15 yards downfield, mind you, to take away, and then is able to get the sack on Deshaun Watson. So the anatomy of that play is, of course, the coverage, right? Dropping back into coverage and then being able to get the pass rush. So the delayed pass rush is a part of the play call. That's one part. The communication between the linebackers and the defensive line with Carl Granderson, that's the second part. The third part is really the corners and safeties for not giving up a quick pass to the outside, not giving up anything over the top, remaining disciplined and sticking to, or plastering, they call it, to the receivers as the receivers start to kind of scramble about and try to get away to open up a spot for Deshaun Watson to go. And then the fourth part is Marcus Davenport not allowing Deshaun Watson to get to the outside. And then the fifth part is Carl Granderson being able to step into that lane, get the sack, and get that game done. Get out of Cleveland with a dub. So you want to talk about the anatomy of a play? There's 5 pieces there, and there's more, right? There's not allowing Deshaun Watson to get to the other side, making sure that he's feeling the pressure from the right side that forces him to go to the left side. The defensive tackles as well for holding their positioning so that that rushing lane wasn't more wide open and wasn't as condensed by the time that Carl Granderson got in there. There's so many other pieces to it as well. It was a phenomenal play. And a lot of credit goes to Carl Granderson, but a lot of credit goes to the defense as a whole. And a big part of that defense so far over the course of this season has been rookie cornerback Alontae Taylor. So before we wrap up today, just an update for you. Alontae Taylor targeted 5 times in that game against the Cleveland Browns, allowed only 2 catches, not credited with a pass breakup by Pro Football Focus. Calling BS on that because he knocked that pass out of a receiver's hands that ended up in Daniel Sorensen's hands for that interception. He also had another forced incompletion by pushing a wide receiver out of bounds at the end of the game in that final drive. One of the reasons why Carl Granderson had an opportunity to get that sack on 4th down was because Alontae Taylor made a great play in an earlier down to help get them to that point. So right now, Alontae Taylor, who has played 350 plus snaps in coverage so far this season, amongst the 111 cornerbacks that have played at least 200 snaps so far this year. Just a couple of quick things to keep in mind or to know. When it comes to reception percentage allowed, 4th lowest out of 111, 46%. When it comes to NFL passer rating, 5th lowest in the NFL out of 111 corners, 59.2%. All of this comes in despite the fact that he has been targeted at least once every 5.1 snaps out of 111 corners. That is the 4th most frequently targeted corner in the NFL. He's tied along with actually Chris Harris Jr., another New Orleans Saint, and then one of the Miami corners as well. So 5.1 snaps per target. One of the most frequently targeted corners in the NFL as a rookie. And he is putting up top 5 cornerback numbers. Shout out to Alontae Taylor because he's doing a magnificent job. And he is one of the best corners in the NFL. Period. All right, y'all, coming up later today, answering some of the biggest questions. I'm just going to call, I liked it War Room Wednesday. I liked it a lot. So we're going to break down some of the biggest questions around the New Orleans Saints. Is Sean Payton and Tom Brady, is that combination actually a reality for the New Orleans Saints? Where are they going for the rest of this season and more? So we're going to be breaking down a ton for you in our second episode, which will drop around 6 p.m. Central time, maybe a little bit earlier. We'll see how quickly I can get it all edited and ready to go. But I appreciate y'all, as always, for coming through for another episode, making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, for your second listen today, until that next episode comes out, you're checking out Locked On Sports today. You're checking out Locked On Pelicans. And hey, shout out Bethune-Cookman hiring Ed Reed. Make sure you go and check out my boy Darian Gray over at Locked On HBCU as well. Appreciate you, as always, for making me a part of your day, part of your routine. And as always, thank you so much for saying yes to me and this show. If you see me, say hi. Big shout out to Nielsen, who said hi on the plane ride home when I was connecting in Atlanta. Finally, on my way home, Nielsen said hi. So shout out to you, homie. I appreciate y'all as always. And of course, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. I trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.